Well, I don't even know. We must make these recordings public, right? So welcome, welcome everyone to this month's chapter installment of the Loki community call. The agenda I have is pretty short. I was just going to talk about sort of what's been going on. The 1.6 release. I want to look. I probably mentioned that at least the last couple of weeks now. It was at least the last month that it was mentioned. So that is actually going to happen early next week. The hold up was a query panic, a race condition that we discovered that proved a bit challenging to pin down, but thanks to Robert Fratto for our last-ditch effort when we just said, hey, can anybody help us? And so that's fixed, though. That's exciting. The only other thing that we just recently sort of overhauled the BoltDB shipper code, and we're actually running that in our operations cluster, which is our biggest internal cluster, which sees, I don't know, a couple terabytes of logs a day. And but we haven't had a chance to really like scrutinize it for performance yet. Functionality-wise, it seems good. There's a big change in how the code was written from the last iteration that was in 1.5. Functionally, I mean, it should be the same, but we kind of refactored it to make it a bit easier to work on. The one significant change that I should mention here is that now requires a 24-hour index period. And this is actually enforced in code. If you try to start with a non-24-hour index period, it will yell at you. Unless you have a index period upcoming that's 24 hours, then I think it does not yell at you. The reasons for this have to do around a change that was made. We are uploading the index files now. So previously it would re-upload and append to the same index file throughout the day, basically. But that sort of mutable state in an object store is a bad deal. It makes it very hard for us to look at things like deletes. It makes the synchronization across components when we start talking about things like deletes or caching. It makes it really, really difficult. So this now has immutable state in the object store. So we upload a new index file every 15 minutes. The big difference there is now, a querier has to download as many as, number of ingesters times 15-minute periods in a day index files to do queries. So there's definitely some optimization we need to do there. Right now that's done serially and needs to be done parallelly. Actually, I was going to see if I could look at that today or tomorrow to change that at least before the release, but there isn't really an easy way for me to separate those changes out. I do think functionally they're fine. If you're running on a really big instance, the performance might change, but I'm not totally sure. But that's why this is experimental. So, but the good news is that this is moving forward a more stable, sort of better platform to build on, and we're going to actually be putting a lot more effort into optimizing this for performance now. So by the time the next release rolls around, it should be getting a lot closer to production ready. And then I just listed out what we talked about internally for like the work that Grafana Labs is focusing on for Q3. Mid did mention that Cyril is out on leave for about 5 or 6 weeks. So when he's back, he's going to dig into the logql v2 work we've been working on. The work that Owen's been doing for alerting is going to be basically the PR is up and review it. We need to merge it, start hammering on that to see how alerting from logs works. And kind of a next progression from that is a ruler to be able to generate metrics from logs when they're ingested. So we're going to start taking a look at what that would entail. And then relatively new to the list here is this ingester write-ahead log. This has been spurred by a kind of unfortunate incident where some poor odds led to a bunch of chunks synced at the same time that were very full, which I think there's some tuning we need to do on how the flush code works too, but it led to several ingesters out of memory crashing. And that just every time that we have ingester crashes or anyone does, it sort of reminds us that we should have a write-ahead log. So I think that's going to make the high up in the list for the next quarter. So that when I say quarters, this is the Grafana Lab financial quarters, which are August 1st through, I believe, the end of October. That's just the cadence that we're on. So that's what we're looking at. So anybody like to add anything else? Talk about any of this stuff? Anything exciting? Anything not exciting?
I'm excited, Ed.
Matt's excited. I'm excited. 1.6 is it's been a long time. I bet it's been about 3 months now, which is really long. So there's
Isn't it long every time?
every time, man. Yeah. On the one hand, like the releases are generally pretty significant for Loki. On the other hand, they're kind of too far apart. But every time it's the same story though. Like I start getting ready to make the release, and we either think we find a bug, or find a bug, which is not. I don't know. Maybe that's every time, maybe not. But more likely, what happens is, oh man, it would be really nice to have this in the next release because everyone would really like this. But if we merge it today, then we need to at least run it for a while before we cut a release from it. And then like 2 days later, we do that again. And then 2 days later, we do that again. And at some point, it's like, oh, it's been like 3 weeks now. We should probably have cut this release anyway.
Can we put in some release cadence like Cortex or Prometheus? And like if a feature doesn't make it, it doesn't make it. They just need to wait 6 weeks more.
I don't know. I mean, yes, we could. I don't know that. Perry, I don't know that it's. I don't know that the experience of what we have now is that like the people that want, new features will run master builds anyway, which in some ways is nice because then they're helping us sort of test things that we're not signing off as a release. But there are cases where, there's people that want features that are unwilling to do that, and they're sort of stuck waiting for them. So that's a problem too.
But then everyone is stuck waiting for them.
I think that we could probably just promote some of our internal releases because we've generally vetted those through all of our environments, right? We have associated branches on the Loki GitHub for them. I'm not sure if we need to do one every week. That seems a little too much, but I think it would really allow us, like we already have a lot of that process and infrastructure in place to actually to take those and promote them, right? Like, could we just start cutting tags off of those?
I mean, we already do, right? Like those they're released as K, 27 or whatever our internal numbering is. I actually put in Docker Hub explicitly to tell people not to use those, and the biggest reason for that is like if it goes wrong for us, and we tend to like which doesn't happen often, right? But if we just scrap a release completely because it had problems, there's no way to communicate that to people. So I didn't want a case where somebody's like regularly running our internal release builds and one of them is totally broken and they don't have any way to know that. So maybe the opposite of that could be true, right? Where we regularly promote, some of them as, interim builds that, once we've, if we've been running them for a week with no problems, there's no reason anybody else should be concerned.
So generally, we use a 2-week cycle internally to get through all of our different environments for Loki. Yep. So, like we could say, we want one release every month, 2 months, whatever. You can kind of figure that out there, but then we just choose the closest one that overlaps with that time period, and we don't have to directly use the K release, K tag, K branch, whatever.
Right, we could retag them. That would probably be much clearer. Yeah,
and I think that would make it a lot easier for us to do this more regularly, because it seems like a really small step that we're missing to just get them as official releases. I think a lot of of the work around this will actually come from like the kind of promotional side, right? Like writing up, which generally falls disproportionately on Ed's head.
Yeah, right. What do we include for release notes? And I think our internal process should probably be doing a better job of this anyway. We have some other reasons that would drive having some better understanding of what's in a release. I like the idea though of just somewhat semi-regularly or monthly promoting a build so that we at least have I don't know what to call them yet, but
we can call them 1.7, 1.8, so on.
Yeah, I mean, you could.
For Perry, the context is we're like sometimes our releases are too far apart, and we're trying to see if regular cadence makes sense.
The part about this the reason why I'm not keen to just have a release every week or month is that it becomes sort of noisy or background noise, right? Like, and it's not uncommon in our releases that now we have some upgrade requirements. So if someone's not willing to do a new release like every week or month or whatever, like the burden of them to jump versions is higher, and to see what's changed is higher. So for a lot of people, having like a couple month release cycle was maybe already too aggressive, right? Like, depends on your it depends on where you fall on that spectrum. So like having like more formal releases with bigger write-ups and release notes, and not having them so often seems nice to me, but also having a way for people to have access to the interim builds that we're already making.
May I share my experience? We have here in OpenShift, for example, a release train, and I think to sustain a release train, you have to you have at least to be confident enough that your CI/CD can sustain this train. Things like that are there is a deadline, and you put things on your deadline, and if things are not finished up to that deadline, then you need a process or tooling or whatever to remove this thing from your code base. So this brings some, let's say, you can solve this with bots or whatever, but some machinery in there that make PR and PR merging a little bit heavier. For example, in OpenShift, in any of our operators, for example, even if you are not of the core product, you cannot merge things until you pass two big gates. You have the review, you have then the are you in the train, are you out of the train? And then if you are out of the train, you will have changes that will stay there, and you need to rebase and keep up until you get the gate opened. And this gets far worse from a perspective of a developer velocity if you take into account patch releases for older releases. At some point in time, you may say we support the last two releases of Loki, whatever comes for security or whatever, you will need a policy. And then you will have, let's say, to say, how do I survive this patch releases? So I think everything starts with confidence in the CI/CD we have currently. I'm not experienced to tell here how far we are here in Loki, but the more process you want, because you want cadence, the more tooling and the more confidence you should have in the systems before you go out with a cadence. I think what I see currently or observe is we open a PR, and sometimes a PR is not only a feature, it's also importing things like updating Cortex. And yes, the code compiles, the tests pass, but maybe the one or the other glitch that we import from Cortex may bring a regression in performance and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So we may start there to see how do we catch these things first, and then we see how fast are we defined in a cadence.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way that works now is we promote through our internal environments to environments with basically increasing traffic load and monitoring, because there's not any automated tooling for performance on Loki currently. So it's I don't know. We've had internal discussions around this and with other projects too. Like, can you do this, or how would you do this? Like, at some point, especially writing Go as a programming language, like I think there's no substitute for actually having the software run in an environment where people are using it. And you have, I mean, we're a monitoring company, so we have a lot of tools for monitoring. So that's a direction. That doesn't mean that process can't be automated within using those environments, though, right? Like, and we've actually talked a lot about that too. Like, can we automatically promote through environments? I still think that sort of lends itself to having, like what you're saying, Owen, which is, more or less like certified builds that come out every, regular interval, which is what we're doing now, that we can promote for people to consume in a better way. And then I'm not sure if we want to at that point make those the, like what Gotham's saying, like that's just the build, right? Like that's a release every couple of weeks we have. I just worry that becomes noise for people that are running Loki in most of the environments I'm familiar with, right? Like if something has a new version every 2 weeks,
like
start to stop paying attention to it, right? Like,
I kind of agree with you that maybe 2 weeks is too quick because there are some breaking changes. But if there are no breaking changes, there's no reason not to do monthly releases.
yeah.
But maybe shorten our 3 month span to 6 weeks.
Yeah, 3 months is probably a little long. I'll agree with you there. I do. I mean, ideally, like this is, and it's better for everybody if everybody is sort of constantly updating, right? Like, because that's sort of how we run and test. So the closest that people follow, like what we do, is going to have the closest experience to like what we have, right? Because we don't have infrastructure right now that's saying like go upgrade from version 1 to version 1.6 to see, what happens, right? Like, so I mean, we have upgrade guides for that, but we don't really have any infrastructure in place to test that. I think the long and short of it is, and the interim, I mean, we could probably have certainly, not push out to 3 months, right? Like, but I am interested in seeing if we want to make the beta test train for Loki users, right? Like people that want to have regular releases and are, want to stay more current with the project, that we can make the internal releases, just retag them every once a month or once every couple weeks.
I mean, it depends what you put always in a release. In general, the far we get and need to, let's say, put more maintenance work into that thing, the faster people will ask for releases, because there are minor fixes here and there, security fixes here and there, that you need to bring them out in a fast cadence.
Yeah,
but big
definitely
features,
security.
for example, like BoltDB shipper, need some maturity before we decide.
Yep.
Or we can always work fast and say there is something like declare things experimental, declare things behind feature gates, so that people can use in production, but at their own risk.
Yep.
So it should be explicit what to expect from which piece of Loki you want to use. Yeah. So I for my side, for example, I'm a user of MemberList and BoltDB shipper, and I know what to expect. It's full experimental, and it's not battle proofed. So I am okay if I take a master release and try to figure out how things work out. But I can pay for this. Others may be more conservative on that side.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think you missed the first part though, Perry, but you're probably interested in the BoltDB shipper that we merged a PR last week, which was a pretty sweeping overhaul to sort of the internals.
Yeah.
And
This is really an interesting PR. I'm more a silent reader of this PR currently, lacking resources to jump in the train. But since we are here, we have a small split out in our team that we can focus on things like that currently. So me and other three can concentrate more on upstream work here. So if you feel overloaded with bringing FulTP shipper, you can scream. We have more resources than me currently taking up work here. So
yeah, absolutely. We just promoted it to our biggest internal cluster. We actually set up a new cluster running it to compare against the what's Bigtable is the index we're using in our other cluster. So we have some instrumentation to compare queries between each and basically start improving performance. Initially the biggest change with this PR was forcing, or an associated PR is forcing a 24-hour index and not mutating the objects once they're uploaded. The first iteration was re-uploading an index file every 15 minutes with basically the current index and new additions, but mutating the state in the object stores makes things like caching and deletes extremely difficult to impossible. So having an object store once the objects are uploaded that we by principle never change them simplifies some of that stuff. So that was a driver there. The downside of that is now you have 15-minute index files. Basically, every 15 minutes we make a new file and upload it. So you increase the quantity of index files that you're uploading substantially. Ultimately, we'll probably need a compactor to go through and smush those back down. Maybe though, because depending on how big they are and whether we can actually sort of shard them and download them in pieces, we might not want one index per day, but the one index per day sort of makes more sense for the size of the files that we want to work with and the requirements around how deletes would work and the tooling eventually that we'll have to have for deletes. So
I think we need to figure this out over time. The forecomer, as it happened, for example, with TSTB, they start with a specific amount where they do chunks and their, let's say, store, not in their index, and then they figured out that 2 hours is a good set, let's say, to cut these chunks. And we will see what people do with their indices in terms of cardinality, and then we can figure out what is here better path, better optimum in terms, should we go for 24 hours less, or give an option to the users to declare their own, let's say, time frame if it fits for them. So I think 24 hours, from what I read from the PR, are fine. At least it solves this problem. What if have a lot of data and I want to restart this thing? It makes it possible again. So possible in terms you don't need to wait until you get retired. But and the immutability is definitely a win if we want later to do anything like iteration or things like that. So you don't need to care about people mutating this beast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is a step in the right direction, and we're just now running this at a reasonable scale to see what it looks like. Right off the bat, one of the problems is we download the index files in a single thread. That needs to be parallelized because we basically wait. But that should be relatively easy. It's tough. Like, this is the problem with that 1.6 release. Some of the stuff I'd like to fix for that release, but maybe the real path here is just ship it and it's still marked experimental, and we'll promote internal releases with those fixes sooner, or we'll just do a 1.7 at a faster clip than.
Don't bother. It's a good shape to start. We can only endorse this. We already have a branch using this for our smoke test currently to see how things work, but we will go with that in our internal staging cluster when you are with 1.6 out. And if it's slow, it's slow. It's okay. It's single threaded. We know what it is.
Yeah.
So.
But that is going to be a big improvement source. We're going to be, our goal is to really drive that query performance to be as good as we can. Well, ideally good or better than what we can get out of Bigtable, but that might might take some time. But
so I know that one of the things I would like to do in the next few months is bring some of there's an integration testing framework in Cortex, and I'd like to see some of that in Loki as well. Would you be interested in does it make sense to map some of the smoke testing that you're talking about over into
yes,
like that?
Especially because it becomes just a handcrafty thing here. And if we can, I mean, there is one stream here that I, since you're speaking this up, that we were talking last week in our grooming. We would like to bring in some per component benchmarks. So spinning up this beast and start writing some benchmark, because testing the whole thing on a cluster for small things and small changes is just you just lose a lot of time. And if you fix things in distributor, you want to have your effect at least a benchmark that gives you a distributor has a regression. So I think, yes, an integration test framework would be the way to go, and extend on that for benchmarks later. So
yeah, I think I would need to check, but I believe that the integration testing framework in Cortex it either uses directly or is modeled on top of the one from Thanos, which I think does combine benchmarking as well. But that would be something I'd be really interested in, and it would be great to get a couple extra hands on.
Yeah, but just out of curiosity, we don't have anything yet in the Loki repository, right? It's just hidden in the vendor dependencies called Cortex.
Yeah, we would need to pull that out, and I haven't looked through it.
No, I mean, we would need to wire it up, right? Like the code is vendored, but we would need to actually write it to where anyone can start adding tests and start using it. But it should be easy to get to. It's just nothing's been done with it yet.
Yeah, there's a number of small things that I think we could really get benefits from, right? Just out the gate, right? Like things that compile, but you can't actually run, right? So we should have like really, really small smoke tests for running with example configurations, syncing those with our with our documentation, so that we know
that one's been on my list for a while.
In our docs exactly actually run, because that tends to rot over the course of development, and then we end up fielding answers in public Slack about
that's just a bummer, right? Like that's a terrible user experience when you copy and paste the config out of the old docs and it doesn't work.
It means that it takes a lot of time out of our days whenever we need to help people out with that, and we obviously want to. It's just I think this is a better way forward. We can actually devote some of the initial fixed cost time. Cool, great, all right. That's all I have.
Yeah. I think technically I think it's still a separate call, isn't it? The bug scrub.
It is, technically.
All right, we should probably go.
Because they're on a separate cadence, I think is why, but they always overlap the days we have these calls. But yeah, I'm gonna hop over there just in case anybody else was joining, even though I don't expect anybody else to be there. But let's talk about bugs for a bit. But all right, see you guys.